52 BC, Gaul, Oppidum of Alesia. In the day following a dreadful night of fighting, the Arverni leader Vercingetorix is victorious. In the heart of the fray, he confronted, then killed with his bare hands, the enemy leader, King Hasdrubal. After his crushing victory at the Battle of Cannae, the General Hannibal attacked Rome. The rival city was razed to the ground. In Carthage, taking advantage of both his great military prestige and his huge war chest, Hannibal seized power and proclaimed himself king. During the following century, the Carthaginian armies conquered the rest of the Western Mediterranean, even venturing into Gaul. But none of that ever happened. In 216 BC, a small grain of sand will change the outcome of the conflict between Rome and Carthage. Our history is no more than a series of incredible events. Every one of us can influence its course. From the birth of a 1,000-year-old empire to the death of a flourishing civilization. From the creative genius of a handful of men to a worldwide cultural revolution. From the darkest of totalitarian visions to the most horrific of great wars. From the heroic resistance of an entire people to the iron determination of a minority. The most infinitesimal of our decisions can influence the future of humanity. To know the past is to foresee the future. Eighth century BC, a Phoenician queen, Dido, landed on the African coasts where she founded the city of Carthage. 6 centuries later, the Carthaginian Hannibal Barca invaded Italy and decimated the Roman legions. In 146 BC, finally defeated by Roman armies, Carthage is pillaged, set ablaze, and razed. These 3 events are key moments of the Carthaginian era. They resulted in its destruction by its great rival, the Roman Republic. North Africa, 8th century BC. The Phoenician queen Dido, forced to flee from her native city of Tyre on the Lebanese coast, finally landed here, on the other side of the Mediterranean Sea. She asked the local chief for a land where she and her people could settle. According to the legend, he promised her as much land as could be encompassed by an ox hide. Dido cut the ox hide into fine strips so that she had enough to encircle an entire nearby hill for her new city. Diplomacy and negotiation, 2 mainstays of this embryonic city, helped create one of the most impressive powers of antiquity, Carthage. Phoenicians were indisputably the greatest sailors of antiquity. Although they didn't know the compass yet, they knew how to find their bearings even at night. At the end of the 2nd millennium BC, they turned to maritime commerce and set up trading posts and colonies on the Mediterranean. Each new colony was independent, but they were all united by a common culture, the same language and the same beliefs. Carthage, which means new city, was one of these colonies. From the beginning, its development relied on trading, then agriculture and craft production. Situated on a peninsula closely linked to the dry land like numerous Phoenician cities, the town quickly extended its zone of influence from Spain to Cyprus. It became a real sea empire, an economic confederation. At the head of the city, no king or tyrant, but 2 senior officials, the suffets, elected for a period determined by a senate and controlled by a popular assembly.
Welcome to the memory of humanity. Every historical event, regardless of how small, is recorded and connected. You only need to change one to upset all the others. Here, we are able to control time, analyze and compare billions of events in order to rewrite history in infinite ways. Was Carthage the first republic in history? Actually, there are only a few sources of that time, and we must rely on Roman or Greek historians from antiquity. But most likely, Carthage was ruled by a system both oligarchic and democratic. Two judges holding the executive power, the suffets, were elected for a period determined by a senate, whose members were themselves born into the major Carthaginian families. A popular assembly allowed the population to express itself and constituted an opposition force. According to Aristotle, Carthage, founded 300 years before the birth of the Roman Republic, would thus be the first republic of history. Let's resume.
Following an argument, Remus has just been killed by his twin brother Romulus. According to legend, the blood of the son of Mars establishes a village on the Palatine Hill, in the heart of the Italian peninsula. He gives the village his name, Rome. The early days of Rome were as violent as its founding myth, made of frequent wars against neighboring cities. In 390 BC, the armies of Rome were wiped out and the city was devastated by the Celtic hordes of the great chief Brennus. The Romans will never forget this traumatic experience. Surrounded by enemies, they become obsessed with their own survival and continuously build a bigger and bigger living space, the only guarantor for their security. Yet, in the 3rd century BC, there was no shortage of enemies in this part of the world. A vast number of peoples, cities, and kingdoms were in perpetual motion. Alexander the Great's shadow is still hanging over the Eastern Mediterranean. In Western Mediterranean, many Greeks live in Sicily, Italy, or Gaul, where they had founded numerous colonies, such as Massalia or Syracuse. Alliances are formed and broken up, each one trying to impose its authority. War after war, sacrifice after sacrifice, the Roman legions soon controlled the entire Italian peninsula. In 264 BC, even though it was only a regional power, Rome had forged itself an unfailing fighting spirit. Its legions of citizen soldiers were devoted and ready to die for their country. During many centuries, Carthage and Rome developed independently. Carthage was a sea confederation rooted in Africa, while Rome was a mainland power turned towards the lands. Both cities even made several trading agreements. However, Rome had acquired a taste for conquest and power. With Italy conquered and under control, new threats could only come from Gaul in the north or Sicily in the south. However, Sicily, a strategic island situated at the crossroads of sea routes, was almost entirely under Carthaginian domination. Both powers are now facing each other, only separated by a strait a few kilometers wide.
The Mediterranean Sea is surrounded with lands and sprinkled with islands. Whoever wants to control it must own a great naval fleet. In the 3rd century BC, the most powerful warship was indisputably the Quinquereme, an antique galley whose main feature was 5 lines of rowers, as the name indicates. Its 300 rowers, twice a standard galley, brought the necessary power to charge at enemy ships and strike them head-on. The rostrum, a kind of bronze ram situated on the bow, smashed the opposing hull to pieces. The Romans, clearly more at ease on land than at sea, will develop their own tactics. The corvus, a wooden removable bridge equipped with an iron post, was designed to strike enemy ships and allow boarding, followed by a hand-to-hand fight in which the legionaries excelled. The Romans had found a way of turning naval combat into land battle, a way to restore the balance of power.
260 BC, off Mylae, the Roman fleet has just defeated Carthage's. It came as a shock. One of the greatest navies of the whole Mediterranean had just been crushed on its home turf. The first major naval victory in Roman military history, but not the last one, as the terrible war between rival cities drags on for years. From 264 BC, legions landed in Sicily. Since then, one siege followed another, each camp scoring points in turn. Aware that the conflict would be settled by control of the seas, the Roman Senate voted for the building of a great fleet and heavily recruited Greek sailors from the south of Italy. On its side, Carthage recruited mass mercenaries, and in Sicily, the troops of the brilliant General Hamilcar Barca succeeded in thwarting Roman legions. The conflict gets bogged down. Soon, there are thousands of casualties. Two superpowers are throwing all their strength in a gigantic combat. Off Ecnomus, the Roman fleet is once again victorious and lands troops in Africa. The road to Carthage is wide open. Carthage counterattacks and sends 200 galleys and 100 war elephants in Sicily. In Drepana, the Carthaginian fleet inflicts a dreadful defeat on the Roman galleys. Carthage rules the seas, but soon has to face an uprising from the Numidian tribes. Forced to devote its energies to this revolt, the city can't capitalize on its victories. In Rome, the last defeats swallow up money, which allows anti-war forces to bring new military expenditure to a standstill. At the same time, Carthage is on its knees, tries to obtain credit from Egypt. Trading, the driving force behind the Carthaginian economy, is deadlocked. War is expensive. Seeing that the situation is at a standstill, Romans resort to a private loan. At their own expense, wealthy citizens equip a final naval fleet. It must end. 241 BC, off Aegean Islands. The confrontation, just like the war, is huge. The Roman victory is crushing. For the Carthaginian Senate, dominated by major merchant families, this new defeat is the last straw. For them, instead of a new military option, it is now time for negotiation.
Mercenaries or citizens? War was both expensive and risky. The Carthaginian Senate chose to get out of this conflict using money and diplomacy. The city had soon made the pragmatic choice to recruit mercenaries, particularly to save its limited manpower resources. The Carthaginian armies were thus not permanent and lacked cohesion. Libyans, Numidians, Iberians, and Celts made up the basis of both its infantry and cavalry. The Carthaginian generals could also count on the tanks of the time, war elephants. Led by a mahout, they were trained to charge at the enemy ranks, to break the first lines, and to spread panic by trampling on soldiers. Unlike Carthage, Rome owned a land army mostly made up of citizens. Each legion was composed of 30 maniples, which were also divided up into 2 centuries. The whole, very flexible and maneuverable, made 3 lines of battle. On the front line, the Hastati took the first confrontation. The Princeps came after, followed by the Triarii, the veterans, who formed the last bastion. A real army of citizens, in which every Roman less than 46 years old could be called up to serve the Republic. Two completely different conceptions of an army.
October 218 BC, northern Italy. Hannibal Barca, son of the great Hamilcar, hero of the last war against Romans, has just crossed the Alps. Hannibal, his army, and his elephants. Just in front of them is Italy, home of the Roman Republic. It is now time for revenge for this Carthaginian general. At the end of the previous war, Carthage was forced, in addition to the payment of a large indemnity, to give up Sicily and numerous islands. 23 years of armed peace had followed, during which Rome had seized Sardinia. Meanwhile, Carthage had made up for its territorial losses by the conquest of a large part of Spain. The oligarchic power of the Carthaginian merchants had seen the emergence of a new dominant family, the Barcids, of which Hannibal was a member. Deeply devoted to his city, the young Carthaginian had lived the dark moments of the dreadful mutinies of mercenaries. Now a grown-up and a general, he considers that it is time to make Rome pay. Aware that his fleet is weak, he decides to attack the Romans by surprise and to travel overland to reach Italy through the natural barrier of the Alps. His goal is to provoke the uprising of the allies of Rome and to defeat the Roman legions. When the Roman senators learn about Hannibal's feat, they are panic-stricken. An army is immediately sent to confront him. Then another one, and so on. Each one of them is defeated. Showing a true tactical genius, Hannibal surrounds the legions at Ticinus, attacks them by surprise at the Trebia, slaughters them in thousands on the misty shores of Lake Trasimene. The Republic is abandoned by several allies of Rome, but most of them remain faithful to Rome. Despite his resounding military victories, Hannibal has not yet succeeded in raising up Italy. He is counting on a decisive military victory. However, the Romans now refuse direct confrontation. They understand that for the time being, the Carthaginian is simply invincible. To force them to fight, Hannibal seizes the Cannae area, the Roman army's granary. Rome has no other choice than to fight with its last army. August 2nd, in the year 216 BC, Hannibal's 50,000 mercenaries are facing the 80,000 Roman legionaries who are rushing headlong into the Carthaginian general's trap. Quickly surrounded and attacked from all sides, the legions are unable to maneuver and are slaughtered. In the evening of the battle, there are more than 45,000 dead. Hannibal is at the gates of Rome.
We are now at a point of divergence. A point of divergence is a key moment, a crossroads in our history where our world can swing from one side or the other. Hannibal had just brought down the Roman armies. Now he only had to advance on Rome, take the city, and nip the Roman ambition in the bud. If he had done it, we would now live in a world which would have never known the Roman Empire. Numerous serious consequences would have completely changed the face of the world. From the empire, the West inherited the Roman law, the right of property, Latin and Greek art and culture, but also the Christian religion, which was influential all over Europe. Carthage might have exerted its influence to Gaul. Nowadays, Europeans would be deeply impregnated with the Carthaginian culture and might speak a Semitic language closely related to Arabic. However, arrived at the gates of Rome, Hannibal seemed to be hesitant. His troops were exhausted and he lacked siege equipment. Hannibal gave up the siege of Rome and occupied the south of Italy instead. He thought that the surrender of the Romans was both inevitable and imminent. However, sheltered by its sturdy walls, the Roman people will decide otherwise.
202 BC, plain of Zama, North Africa. Hannibal has just been called back from Italy. The Roman troops of General Scipio had landed in Africa, allied themselves with the Numidian prince Massinissa, and threatened to take Carthage. What a strange irony of fate. After having threatened the Roman capital many years ago, his strategy of isolation had completely failed. Italy had remained faithful to Rome, and today he is forced to fly to Carthage's assistance. The Carthaginian elephants charged General Scipio's legions. But Scipio had anticipated the attack and had ordered his troops to let through the mastodons to better surround them before slaughtering them. The soldiers of Rome rapidly have the advantage over Hannibal. Hannibal is defeated. The war is lost. The city is forced to hand over its entire fleet, its war elephants, and Spain. Carthage is a mere shadow of its former self. But even if the city is down, it is still living. Deprived of both political and military roles, Carthage boosts its trade and puts the economical situation right in only a few years. The city gets rich again. After barely 10 years, Carthage offers Rome to pay its war debts in advance. In the Senate, the senators are once more haunted by the specter of a military recovery of Carthage. Catan, one of the most virulent ones, ends every one of his speeches by the sentence "Carthago delenda est," meaning Carthage must be destroyed. The Romans won't take long to find a pretext. Forced to defend itself against an aggression from the Numidian kingdom, Carthage has to rearm. It doesn't take more. In 146 BC, after a long 3-year siege, it is the last action of this age-old war. The Roman troops enter the burning city. The fighting, house after house, is pitiless. The streets are strewn with corpses. The cornered Carthaginians know they are fighting to survive. In vain. During 6 days and 6 nights, the city is engulfed in flames and given over to pillage. The survivors are reduced to slavery. The land is declared sacer, which means cursed. It is strictly forbidden for anyone to settle there. Carthage has been well and truly destroyed. During the same year, Greece is subjected by the legions for good. The influence of Rome soon expands to the entire Mediterranean. However, both this expansion and this wealth inflow are about to completely change the stability of the original city-state. Serious crisis would soon be triggered, followed by a dreadful civil war, which would lead to the end of the Roman Republic, then to the advent of the empire. But that is another story.
Woe to the vanquished. During the antiquity, it was customary to plunder the cities seized from the enemy. The capture of Carthage was a tragedy and an appalling sight. Its population was enslaved or wiped out. Its archives went up in smoke. Its magnificent library was devastated. After a 650-year-old existence, hardly anything is known about this city. It is as if it had disappeared from history. It will subsist only through its language and its culture, which survived in its former colonies. The succession of the 3 wars which led to its destruction are these days known as the Punic Wars. The word Punic is Latin, not Carthaginian. It reveals that the conquerors make history. Rome is the one which survived a century of wars. Thanks to a stronger demography, it showed an unfailing resilience, a tremendous ability to know how to roll with dreadful punches without ever giving up. With its armies devastated and Hannibal ready to give the death blow, Rome refused every kind of surrender and prepared the reprisal. Through its long history, it seems that Rome always refused to negotiate without having secured victory first. The secret of the Roman success may lie in these facts.